I'm Susan Yaki with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, Iran warns about U.S. aircraft carrier activity near the Persian Gulf after more sanctions are imposed.
Should the sanctions affect the export of the Iranian oil, then obviously that's going to have influence on the regime itself.
The Arab League sees progress in an observer mission to Syria. An Egyptian prosecutor calls Mubarak's rule tyranny, and Israeli and Palestinian negotiators are meeting for the first time in 16 months. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. Iran says a U.S. aircraft carrier should not return to the Persian Gulf a day after Tehran completed naval exercises near the strategic Strait of Hormuz. Iranian Army Chief Ayatollah Salehi said today Iran will not repeat its warning, but did not name the U.S. carrier. A spokeswoman for the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, which is based in Bahrain, said last week the USS John S.C. Stennis moved out of the Gulf through the Strait of Hormuz in a pre-planned routine operation. Iran has threatened to respond to sanctions over its nuclear program by closing the strait, a vital export route for the other oil-producing countries of the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy says it will not allow disruptions to Gulf shipping. France today called for stronger sanctions against Iran, including freezing the assets of its central bank. The statement follows a similar move by the United States, which imposed new sanctions targeting the central bank that could also affect Iran's ability to sell oil on international markets. Reports from Iran Monday said the nation's currency slumped to a record low against the U.S. dollar, 2 days after U.S. President Barack Obama signed the sanctions into law. The step is part of a push to hamper Tehran's ability to finance its nuclear and missile programs. The United States and the European Union contend Iran is secretly trying to develop nuclear weapons under the guise of its civilian nuclear program. Iran says its nuclear intentions are peaceful. Amin Sakal is director for the Center of Arab and Islamic Studies at the Australian National University. VOA's Victor Vitti spoke about sanctions on Iran.
Most of the imported goods will be now in higher prices, and given the other economic difficulties that exist in the country, this could really affect the position of the ordinary Iranians, although I think that is not going to have any dramatic effect on the regime in terms of prompting it to change its policy behavior at this stage, because one must not really forget that Iran still has something in the order of $75 billion income from its oil annually, and the regime does have a fallback position in that respect. But should the sanctions affect the export of the Iranian oil, then obviously that's going to have influence on the regime itself.
And Iran has warned that if its oil exports are hurt, it has threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. How serious a threat is that?
I think at this point, to me, it appears that Iran is posturing and trying to send the signals to Washington and America's allies not to inflate sanctions against Iran. But the Iranians also know that if the Strait of Hormuz is closed down, and that is going to have a dramatic impact on Iran as well. It's not only going to affect the flow of oil from the Gulf to the outside world and therefore having an impact on the global economy, but also affecting Iran, because the regime's main source of income is oil. But then on the other hand, there is a group of fatalists within the Iranian administration who probably would not really care much about this. And if it comes to crunch, they probably would welcome a confrontation with the United States or, for that matter, Israel. And as far as they are concerned, that is their fate, and therefore they will be prepared to fight. But hopefully, these are not the people who are going to, at the end, prevail, and the level heads will prevail in Tehran.
Do you suggest that these new sanctions that were imposed just a couple of days ago will really bite into Iran and force it to the negotiating table?
It certainly affects Iran's financial position and also the outside world's dealings with Iran. And as I understand, the United States is also in discussion with a number of other countries, more importantly China, which imports 11% of its oil needs from Iran and has become Iran's largest trading partner. The volume of trade between the two countries in 2010 amounted to something like $13 billion. And I think the United States basically would like to persuade China to support tougher sanctions against Iran and to stop purchasing Iranian oil and replace it with buying fuel from a number of other countries in the region, more importantly Kuwait and possibly Saudi Arabia.
Are you looking for a comprehensive daily look at events reshaping the Middle East? Visit voanews.com/ME. You'll find VOA's original reporting from the region, in-depth analysis from our Washington team, VIP interviews, online polls, photo essays, and mini documentaries. Bookmark us or add us to your RSS reader. That's voanews.com/ME.
Arab League Secretary General Nabil El Arabi said Monday that an Arab League observer mission to Syria has made progress, but that snipers remain a threat in Syrian cities and must be withdrawn. Edward Uranian reports from our Middle East Bureau in Cairo.
The Arab League chief told reporters that snipers continue to fire on Syrian civilians, but he emphasized positive points of the week-old mission, which is intended to end the bloodshed that has flared during a government crackdown on political dissent. Al-Arabi said progress has been made in removing heavy weaponry from Syrian cities, and he said the Syrian government has released more than 3,000 prisoners.
سحبت المظاهر العسكرية من المدن، الدبابات، المدافع، أي حاجة كانت موجودة تم سحبها من المدن.
Al-Arabi said tanks and artillery have been withdrawn from populated areas. He added that Arab League observers have also helped to remove corpses from cities and to bring food to the people in Homs. But the Arab League chief noted that shooting continues and that the next step will be to work to have snipers withdrawn completely. Opposition websites show videos of what are purported to be government snipers on rooftops in several cities. One video shows snipers on the minaret of a mosque. Another video shows the body of a child reportedly killed by a sniper as he left home to buy bread. The authenticity of the videos has not been confirmed. Middle East analyst Hilal Kashan of the American University of Beirut says the Arab League chief's comments about snipers was a breakthrough for the observer mission.
Al-Arabi said today that the Arab League observers will soon issue a statement on the outcome of their mission in Syria. I think he gave us a clue about the direction of the initial statement. He said there are still snipers on rooftops. For Al-Arabi to say that there are snipers is a major development.
The Arab League observer mission is scheduled to end in a little more than 2 weeks. More than 70 Arab League observers are in Syria, with more expected to arrive. But Syrian opposition leaders complain that the team is undermanned, under-equipped, and inadequately trained for the mission. Edward Uranian for VOA News, Cairo.
Egyptian prosecutors are presenting their case against ousted President Hosni Mubarak, accusing him of tyranny during his 30-year rule. VOA's Elizabeth Errett reports from Cairo. A few Egyptians are seeing a parallel in the behavior of the nation's current rulers, especially in the suppression of dissent, as the anniversary of the uprising that ousted Mr. Mubarak nears.
The lead prosecutor on Tuesday called Mr. Mubarak a tyrannical leader who sought to hand power to his younger son Gamal, spread corruption in the country, and open the door to his friends and relatives, ruining the country without any accountability. Mustafa Suleiman's blistering attack on the 83-year-old former president was followed by harsh words for co-defendant Habib al-Adli. The lawyer argued the former interior minister kept the government in power by practicing oppression and violence against Egyptians, in particular during last year's anti-government demonstrations in which more than 800 people were killed. Both men have denied the charges against them. The demonstrators ultimately pushed both Mubarak and Adli from power, but the protests never really stopped. The main difference now is that anger is focused on the interim military rulers, who've overseen crackdown after deadly crackdown on demonstrators in Cairo's Tahrir Square. But Egyptian newspaper editor and political analyst Rania al-Malki says the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, or SCAF, has been careful to obscure any comparison between the Mubarak government's actions and its own.
I think that the CAF is continuing the tyranny, but I don't think that anyone watching the proceedings or anyone reading about the proceedings will make the link between the two. I think over the past month, CAF has managed to control the media in such a way as to make people believe that whatever is happening these days and the tyranny of CAF is actually justified to protect Egypt from a foreign conspiracy.
The accusation of foreign influence in Egyptian affairs has found a receptive audience in some quarters, with raids of human rights groups justified as an attempt to root out such interference. And many Egyptians appear less concerned with the ongoing protests and the crackdowns than with moving forward with parliamentary elections, now in the third and final phase for the lower house. But the comparisons could take on new life in coming weeks. Newly elected lawmakers are set to convene later this month, and some foresee a showdown between them and the SCAF over what powers Parliament will get and how quickly. Just 2 days after that, on January 25th, protesters are expected to mark the first anniversary of the uprising against Mr. Mubarak. And there's also the prospect of the leader of the SCAF, Field Marshal Mohammed Hussein Tantawi, returning to testify in Mr. Mubarak's trial. Editor Al-Malki says she's doubtful the judge will yield to prosecutors' calls for Tantawi to face cross-examination, and even if he does, he's likely to stick to his original statement on the previous government's crackdown on opponents.
I don't think he would say anything different. I think he would say exactly what he said, which was that Mubarak never gave an order to shoot protesters.
Which is exactly what Tantawi is saying about his current government, despite the dozens of deaths in recent weeks. Elizabeth Howitt, VOA News, Cairo.
Israeli and Palestinian negotiators met in Amman, Jordan today for the first time in 16 months for talks on how to restart the stalled peace process. The last set of negotiations fell apart over the issue of Israeli settlement construction. The meeting at the Jordanian Foreign Ministry brought together Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat, his Israeli counterpart Yitzhak Molo, and representatives of the Quartet of Middle East mediators. The Quartet, the United States, the United Nations, the European Union, and Russia, has given Israel and the Palestinian Authority until January 26 to submit proposals on territory and security that would clear the way for the resumption of talks. Prior to today's meeting, Gershon Baskin, co-director of the Israeli-Palestine Center for Research and Information in Jerusalem, acknowledged to VOA's Victor Beattie expectations for any breakthrough were low, but that doesn't mean the two sides shouldn't try.
One must recognize that after 16 months of not talking, even entering the same room together is an achievement, and this is an achievement that is credited to the good work of King Abdullah of Jordan. And I think the interesting thing about these talks today is that it's the Jordanian king who's managed to put them together after all the efforts of the American mediators, of Senator Mitchell, and afterwards presidential envoys. President Obama himself was unsuccessful of getting the parties into the same room to talk, and now they are in the same room talking. The bottom line is that I know of no case in the history of the world where peace was made by not talking. So while expectations are very low, and it seems very unlikely that there actually will be concrete results today, the fact that they are beginning something leaves a little crack in the door for some hope. The demands that each side is making of the other are unacceptable across the lines, and the Jordanian mediators need to be creative to find some different way of approaching the subject. This could also, on the negative side, be just a play out of some kind of deadline which the quartet has put down for a 90-day period, in which time the parties would present plans on borders and security. My understanding is that the State of Israel has not prepared those plans for its position on borders and security to be presented today, and that the Palestinians, in fact, will table two papers, one on borders and one on security, and hope to embarrass the Israeli side into at least responding to the Palestinian proposal.
Well, Gershon, as you know, their positions on settlement activity in the occupied territories hasn't changed, but a lot has happened since they met last September of 2010. You have the Arab Spring and a lot of unrest going on in the region. What impact, if any, will that have?
I think the first impact is the fact that the sides gave in to a request from Jordan to hold these talks today. And I think both Israel and Palestine are deeply concerned about potential unrest and the destabilization of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. Both the Palestinian National Movement and the State of Israel are keenly interested in the Hashemite Kingdom of King Abdullah being strong and being able to stay the way against the protests that have begun in Jordan for reform and change. The main opposition to the Hashemite Kingdom in Jordan are the Muslim Brotherhood, who are both Palestinian and Islamic movement, and I think, quite frankly, they scare both the leaders of the State of Israel and the leaders of the Palestine Liberation Organization. So holding this meeting in Jordan under the auspices of the king is something which has seen it strengthening him, and it's a direct result of everything else that's going on in the region.
Baskin says any progress, especially a breakthrough in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, would embolden moderates and pro-democracy forces in the region in their struggle against Islamist forces. Religion researchers estimate that from 1/3 to 1/2 of all marriages in the United States are between members of different faiths. Some experts say this is due to increased religious flexibility and tolerance in the United States. Others believe it's a sign that Americans' religiosity is being diluted. Debate over the trend is especially contentious among Jews, who are intermarrying faster than other faiths. VOA's Jerome Sokolovsky went to an interfaith congregation as they prepared to celebrate Yom Kippur, the Jewish Day of Atonement.
The shofar, or ram's horn, a symbol of the Jewish high holidays, began a gathering of the Interfaith Families Project. It's a congregation of more than 100 families who are trying to be true to both Christian and Jewish traditions. They meet on Sunday mornings in high school in Kensington, Maryland. They have Jewish prayers, Christian prayers, and some things that belong to neither tradition. Then their children go into classrooms to learn about both Christianity and Judaism.
What do you see?
A star in the middle of an apple.
The teacher is Cindy Porhoriles, a Roman Catholic whose husband is Jewish.
We really try to honor both traditions, both sets of rituals, if you want to call it that, and the foundation of both religions.
Critics say Judaism and Christianity cannot be coherently combined because of Jews' fundamental disagreement with the Christian belief that Jesus was the Son of God. Many parents here say they worry that their children will not be accepted by either of their religions. Angela Whitehead Quigley was also raised Catholic and met her Jewish husband, David Quigley, at university.
Neither one of us was going to convert, that we both felt very strongly about our own faiths. And so we were really trying to find a place that we felt home. And that's what we found here.
But part of what I loved about her from day one was her Christianity. I assume part of what she loved about me from day one was the faith I had, the Jewish background.
Universities are one of the most common places for interfaith dating. Chester Gillis is dean of Georgetown University's Divinity School and a professor of theology. He's writing a book that he hopes will show interfaith couples how to harmonize their belief in God and help them face other obstacles.
If you marry someone from your own community, there's a common sympathy and understanding, a tradition, a culture, social events, family events that you're just familiar with. When you marry outside of that, you may not be familiar with those at all. It may be your first time celebrating Easter, or your first time celebrating Passover, or your first time celebrating Eid.
A study published last year by religion scholars David Campbell of the University of Notre Dame and Robert Putnam of Harvard University found that 1/3 to 1/2 of all marriages in the United States are interfaith. Georgetown's Gillis says religion is more diverse in the United States than in any other country in the world. People are increasingly socializing outside their own faith circles, and recent waves of immigration have brought new groups of Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and others. Religious leaders are under pressure to accept intermarried couples into their churches, synagogues, mosques, and temples. Gillis says the biggest challenge so far has been for Jews.
There's a fierce debate within Judaism as to whether this is a good phenomenon or not. Some, like the Harvard lawyer Alan Dershowitz, argues that This is the end of anti-Semitism. This is acceptance in the common culture. This is very good for Jews. And others argue, particularly in the Orthodox community and sometimes in the conservative Jewish community, no, this is the demise of Judaism.
This is shin, right? Good.
This is hay.
Hay, good.
Hannah Quigley's father is certainly pleased she knows her Hebrew letters, and her mother likes her artwork.
So this is Santa Claus? And then this is what?
Christmas tree.
The Christmas tree.
But which religion will she adopt as an adult? In this preschool class, a 17-year-old graduate of the school helps lead the singing. Eli Kane says dual faith education taught him to appreciate both religions.
I like the open-mindedness of Judaism, but I also like some of the deep belief of Christianity. I guess I respect the deep belief of Christianity.
But asked what he considers himself, he says interfaith. Jerome Sokolovsky, VOA News, Kensington, Maryland.
Up now, our weekly poll feature. Joining me is our Middle East online editor, Yuri Hiltaichuk, to sum up our last topic and share the results. What do you have for us today, Yuri?
Hi, Susan. Among the stories in the news last week was a request for a U.S. visa by Yemen's embattled President Ali Abdullah Saleh. Saleh, who transferred power to a deputy and retained an honorary title of president in a deal last November, brought protesters against his autocratic rule into the streets almost a year ago, and he is said to be seeking a visa for medical reasons. But he himself reportedly undermined his own request by admitting that he was just trying to escape the limelight. The Obama administration, as far as we know, has not yet ruled on the request, but finds itself in a somewhat delicate position. Saleh was an ally in the U.S. fight against terrorism, and his departure from Yemen could help diffuse a still tense situation there. But on the other hand, the U.S. does not want to be perceived as a country providing refuge to a leader whom many of his compatriots would like to see stand trial for crimes allegedly committed by his government during his rule, including the killing of anti-regime protesters by security forces last year. So the dilemma was not lost on poll participants, who ended up being fairly evenly divided on this issue, with more than 50% voting against the U.S. granting Saleh a visa, more than 41% supporting visa issuance, and with the remaining 8% being undecided. These numbers are based on more than 1,150 votes that we received, and as always, I need to stress that this poll is not scientific.
So what are we going to be asking this coming week?
The Arab League observer mission in Syria has been heavily criticized by some for essentially standing by as President Bashar al-Assad's security forces continue their crackdown against anti-government protesters. But then again, there are those who argue that the Arab League observers are better than none at all, and some have even credited them with empowering protesters. Be that as it may, we would like to poll our audience on how they perceive the effectiveness of the monitors. And anybody can weigh in by casting their vote on our site, voanews.com/me. Again, that's voanews.com/me. And we'll meet here again in a week with the results.
Well, thank you very much, Yuri.
My pleasure, Susan.
That's VOA Middle East online editor Yuri Hiltaichuk here in our Washington studios. This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region and of interest to the region. Coming up on International Edition, the Indian Prime Minister says his nation is falling behind China in science skills. Thanks for tuning in to the Voice of America.